The Jets have finally signed a kicker with a proven NFL track record. We're going to talk about that move and all of the other key special teamers on the roster. It's Special Teams Day on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome. This is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, March 28th, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangreneNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or your first watch every day, as we are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit that subscribe button, and you'll never miss an episode. If you happen to be watching on YouTube, please give this episode a thumbs up. It helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find Locked On Jets. Our episode today is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Well, over the weekend, the Jets got active again in free agency. They had been pretty quiet for the last week and a half, but they signed veteran kicker Greg Zuerlein to a contract could be worth up to $2.75 million. The Jets, I don't need to tell you, if you watch this team, they have had major issues at the kicking position over the last 3 years. Joe Douglas has proven that he's awful at evaluating kicking prospects because the Jets have brought in an unproven kicker after unproven kicker, and none of them have worked out. When you talk Vedvik, Ficken, Amendola, actually last year at the end of the year they brought in Eddie Pinero, who I have frequently referred to as my new favorite player just because he can connect on field goals. He was 8 for 8 on field goal attempts. The Jets finally bring in a kicker with a proven NFL track record, and thinking it through this weekend, I started considering this, and I came to the conclusion that if you're Joe Douglas, sometimes you have to self-scout. You have to know what I'm good at evaluating, what I'm bad at evaluating. And Joe Douglas has been horrible at evaluating kickers. So why is this the first time you're bringing in a proven kicker? Anyway, we should just move past that because they have finally brought in a proven kicker. So hopefully this puts an end to the kicking issues. But I was also thinking that we really don't spend much time talking about special teams. So on today's show, I want to give the special teamers some love because around 15% of all NFL snaps or all NFL plays come on special teams. So it actually does play a role in these games. You know, you think through the years, you think back to the last time the Jets were good, the early Rex Ryan days when Mike Westhoff was the special teams coach. How many times in a big game was it a big special teams play that turned it? Whether it was Antonio Cromartie's big return in the wild card game in Indianapolis to set up the last drive, or Eric Smith making a tackle in New England in the divisional round on a fake punt. Special teams can really matter. So I want to kind of go through Jets special teams and talk about the key members of those units. And we can begin at the kicker spot where Greg Zuerlein's coming in. This is a guy who, a 10-year NFL veteran, first 8 years with the Rams, last 2 with Dallas, first team All-Pro back in 2017. A year later, hit the kick he's probably best known for, which was the kick that sent the Rams to the Super Bowl. It was a 57-yarder in overtime of the NFC Championship game against the Saints, and 57 yards shows you this guy's got a big leg. I know it was indoors, but he had a 57-yard field goal to send the team to the Super Bowl. That shows you the kind of leg he's got. Around an 82% career average on field goal accuracy, so pretty solid. And you look at the situation now, and maybe we can finally stop talking about the kicker spot, because really, kicker you only talk about when your guy's completely failing. Either that, or if you have like Justin Tucker or Adam Vinatieri, one of the guys who's at the very top. But it really should not have been as hard for the Jets to find a kicker as it's been the last couple of years. In fact, this is a perfect example because you had a guy who's got a decent track record who's been sitting out there for 2 weeks waiting to be signed. So it shows you there's always a kicker available. I mean, the NFL, the kicker spot, you have like the top tier, which is Justin Tucker, and maybe another guy or two. I don't even know if there's another guy or two at this point, but maybe another guy or two. You have at the other end the guys who cannot kick, who are essentially the guys the Jets have been signing. And then you have this very broad middle class where guys are going to be pretty competent for the most part. Maybe you run into a guy who has a bad year. Maybe you run into a guy who has a really hot streak. And the thing about kicker is from year to year, there's a lot of inconsistency because the sample size is so small. And when you're talking about a little over 30 kicks a season, one extra miss a month can like destroy your whole season statistically. And that's something to keep in mind. Is that, when we talk about a guy who made 95% of his kicks last year, well, probably due for a regression unless it's Justin Tucker. So it should not be as hard as the Jets have made this out to be. And now you have two guys who at least have a track record. You've got Greg Zuerlein, and you have Eddie Pinero, who maybe did not have a big track record when the Jets signed him last year, but went 8 for 8. And Eddie Pinero's gotten a lot of skepticism in the fan base, and I think it's just because I don't know if it's mechanical, but it looks ugly coming off his foot when he kicks. It's just like the spin of the ball does not look good. But there's an old saying in baseball, like there's some guys with ugly swings or ugly approaches at the plate who produce, and there's an old saying in baseball that if you don't like the way it looks, just look down and look at the numbers at the end of the year, and you'll be happy with the results. And that's kind of reminds me of like what Eddie Pinero's like, because he was 8 for 8 last year. Even though like the perceptions that he doesn't have a huge leg, and maybe he doesn't have like a Greg Zuerlein leg, he's never missed a kick from beyond 50 in his career. And while the Jets did not have him do kickoffs last year, he did kickoffs a couple years ago in Chicago and had a touchback average that was maybe a little below average, but not horrible. So Eddie Pinero is a decent other option. So you'll have a training camp battle. And the way things work in the NFL with the expanded practice squad rules is probably you'll have your top guy, whoever wins your training camp battle will be your kicker. The second guy can go on the practice squad in case you need him for a week, in case there's an injury or something. And maybe we can have 2 kickers who actually know what they're doing, and we can stop complaining about the kicker position for the Jets. Wouldn't that be lovely? I think it would be. Now, when we're talking about Jets core special teamers, there are always 3 guys who pretty much do nothing but special teams for you. One is the kicker. The other is obviously the punter, Braden Mann, entering his 3rd season. Now, the punter spot's a spot that I think probably has some controversy based on the way the Jets have handled it this last year, because Braden Mann suffered an injury in the opener against Carolina, and the Jets brought in a veteran punter, Thomas Morstead. And Morstead, during his time with the team, produced like a top 10 punter. He was top 10 in total average. He was top 10 in net average. Morstead did a really good job for the Jets. And Mann came back, and they cut Morstead. And Mann, after a really bad rookie season where he was at the bottom of the league, was kind of middle of the pack the rest of the way in both total average and net average. And you sit there and you say, well, on some level, I guess it makes sense because you got the younger guy, got a guy you drafted last year, and you hope he's the punter of the future. You hope he's a 10 to 15-year punter. But again, punter's another spot where you don't necessarily have that much of a difficulty of finding somebody. So even if Morstead's only here another year or two, I don't think it's going to be that difficult to find a new guy. So I don't know how much patience you should have at the punter position. And I wonder a little bit, like looking back on this, whether the Jets made the right move, because Mann came in when the Jets drafted him in the late rounds in 2020. There was a lot of hype around him, and he was okay last year. He was not good as a rookie. He was okay last year. He hasn't really lived up to the hype. Now, Lachlan Edwards, the guy who was the punter before Mann, he had kind of a rough rookie season himself, and then he developed into a very good punter. So we'll see what happens there. But I look at this, and I was thinking this at the time, based on what we had seen from Mann at that point, and based on how Morstead had performed, maybe the Jets made a mistake. And I cannot wait to get into the punter debate in the comment section, because I'm sure everybody's going to have very hot takes on the punter situation for the New York Jets. And then there's the third guy. The guy who's frequently the most popular player on the team is the long snapper. It's been Thomas Hennessey for the Jets for the last few years. He replaced Tanner Purdom, who himself replaced James Dirth. And the thing about long snapper is part of the reason the player's so well liked is that, first of all, he's on your team forever. Typically, you don't change long snappers that quickly. And you don't really notice them making a mistake, because most long snappers, the rate of success is very high. In fact, the only time you ever really have a long snapper stick out in a negative way is when there's a bad snap, and those just don't happen. I mean, if you ask a lot of NFL fans who've been watching the NFL for like 2 decades, to name a long snapper, they probably could not, aside from the long snapper on their own team, or this guy Trey Junkin, who in a playoff game in 2002 for the Giants had 2 bad snaps in the fourth quarter and cost the Giants the game. And that's the only time people learned Trey Junkin's name after he had a long career of success. Those were the last 2 snaps of his career. So you always appreciate the long snapper. You very rarely see him make a mistake, and Thomas Hennessey is the Jets' long snapper. I think, a guy who if you're a diehard fan, you know who he is, and he's probably going to be a very popular player for you. And if you're not a diehard fan, maybe you haven't heard of him, but you're not complaining about the performance. Because I was thinking back through Thomas Hennessey's time with the Jets. I can't really remember a point where he failed for this team, which is what you're expecting. I mean, you're expecting close to perfection from your long snappers in this league, and Hennessey certainly has done the job for the Jets. So those are your three core special teamers, but there are also players who kind of make their living on special teams for the Jets, and I'm going to give them some love ahead here on this Monday episode of the Locked On Jets podcast. Today we're talking about the special teams units on the Jets. These are areas of the team that are sometimes underappreciated, but I got to tell you, I think everybody can appreciate Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar on the market. These are protein bars, but they don't taste like them. All bars are covered in 100% chocolate, and there are so many delicious flavors. You've got mint brownie, you've got coconut almond, and new for this month is white chocolate cookies and cream. They are all delicious, and new flavors are coming out all the time. If the folks at Built Bar think a flavor might be good, they make it. It'll be delicious, and it will be good for you. Because at Built Bar, they're all about the taste. They make it delicious first, then figure out how to make it healthy. And these bars are pretty healthy. Most bars contain 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein. You can compare that to a candy bar, which usually has around 240 calories, 30 grams of sugar, and dozens of net carbs. So go to Built.com right now and check out all the options for you. There are so many delicious flavors. And by the way, while you're there, if you decide you want to buy one, use promo code LOCKED15. You'll get 15% off your order. Again, it's promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED, number 1, number 5, it's all one word, for 15% off at Built, BUILT.com. Thank you again for making Locked On Jets your first listen every day. And make sure you're following Locked On NFL. Locked On experts covering the biggest stories around the NFL Monday through Friday in less than 30 minutes. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Now, on today's show, we are talking about the key special teams players for the New York Jets. Special teams make up around 15% of the plays in an NFL game, and we barely ever talk about special teams except when something goes spectacularly right or spectacularly wrong. So let's talk about some of the key special teamers for the Jets. And now there's one guy out there who's obviously a key special teamer who is talked about a lot, and that's Braxton Barrios. Barrios was a first-team All-Pro kick returner this year, led the league with a 30.4 yard average on kickoff returns, and he was also pretty good on punt returns this year as well. A 13.4 average on 15 returns. Now, that was not enough to qualify him for the league leader. 15 returns was not enough to qualify him for the league leaderboard, but he'd be right near the top if he was there. And, a couple of years back, he was near the top with 11.4 yards per return. So Barrios is obviously a guy who gets a lot of discussion around him, and part of his value is on special teams. Now, I think if there's one area where you might say this could be an area of improvement, is Barrios did finish second in the NFL with 25 fair catches this year. So I do wonder a little bit, is it a case where he's maybe making some fair catches he shouldn't be making? Is part of that average and punt return so high because he's only catching it and returning it when there's open field in front of him? Those are valid questions, but I think there's no question about it that Braxton Barrios is a valuable special teamer for the Jets. Now, there are a couple other guys who maybe don't get as much attention as Braxton Barrios, and I'd like to point them out. And the two guys who are really kind of the special teams leaders for the Jets are Justin Hardy and Del'Shawn Phillips. And these are guys who play consistently across all the phases of special teams. They play on kickoff returns. They play on punt returns. They play on coverage units for kickoffs and punts. In fact, both of these guys played over 70% of the special team snaps for the Jets last season. Now, Hardy probably committed too many penalties. And Hardy might be a name you know because the Jets signed him in free agency a year ago, specifically to play on special teams. He was kind of a special team standout for the New Orleans Saints. And after a 2020 season where the Jets struggled in the third phase of the game, the special teams unit, they decided to invest in a special team or a special teams ace in Justin Hardy. Last year, Del'Shawn Phillips kind of came out of nowhere. In fact, the first couple of games of the season, he was on the practice squad. He was called up to the active roster, which is now something that's allowed. You can call up a special teamer for a couple of weeks to be on your active roster without giving him a spot on the 53-man roster. And in that first game of the season against Carolina, he had 3 special teams tackles. So he played well enough that he kind of earned himself a spot on the special teams unit. And was a standout through most of the season. And I found a website that actually has special teams tackles totals. Hardy led the Jets with 12. Phillips finished second with 11. So these are really kind of the two core special teamers. Through the years, Daniel Brown has played a role for the Jets. You look at him and you might have wondered why the Jets kept bringing him back. In fact, the Jets traded Daniel Brown this season in the deal to Kansas City that brought Laurent Duvernay-Tardif. In fact, that was the trade. It was Duvernay-Tardif for Daniel Brown. And then the Chiefs cut Brown, and the Jets brought him back late in the season. Daniel Brown was another guy who played special teams a lot for the Jets. He was a guy who played across multiple units, a guy that Brant Boyer seemed to really like. And if you wonder why the Jets through the years kept bringing back Daniel Brown, that's the reason. And there's one other guy who kind of played a role on special teams this year. He didn't produce a ton of tackles, but a guy Brant Boyer seems to like, and that was a late-round pick last year, a guy who's generated a lot of attention because of a position change he made. That's Hamza Nasruddin. And in every game he played except one, Nasruddin played at least 60% of the special teams snaps. So another guy Brant Boyer likes. Now, Nasruddin was dealing with some injuries during the season, so he did not play as many total snaps as, say, Phillips or Hardy did. But this is a guy I think Brant Boyer seems to really like having on his unit, a guy who sees plenty of action on special teams. So those are some of the key players. You may not have realized that Nasruddin was such a key special teamer. You probably knew about Hardy because the Jets signed him from the Saints to play special teams. You may have known Del'Shawn Phillips because I try and talk a lot about Del'Shawn Phillips, but those are some of the key players beyond Braxton Barrios, who obviously is one of the top return guys in the NFL. These are guys who help make Jets special teams better. They help turn Jets special teams into a strength. But the Jets also brought in some players this offseason, and you may be focused on how they perform on the offensive side of the ball or the defensive side of the ball at the natural position. But every player the Jets signed in free agency has experience on special teams, and I'll tell you where you might be able to expect to see them in 2022 and the game's third phase ahead here on the Locked On Jets podcast on this Monday. Today we're talking about special teams. A good special teams unit helps a team's overall health, and I also want to tell you about this product, Athletic Greens. With one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging. All the things. And right now it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition, especially now that we're in the cold and flu season. It's just one scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. There's no need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NFL Network. Again, that is athleticgreens.com/NFL Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. This is the Locked On Jets podcast on this Monday. Today we're talking about special teams, and I've talked about the specialists who play on the Jets, the kicker, the punter, and the long snapper. I've talked about some of the special teams aces on the team, but the Jets also made a number of free agent signings, and these players all played various roles on their respective teams' special teams units through the years. So I want to talk about where you may see some of these guys line up on special teams through the season for the Jets. And we can begin with Lachlan Tomlinson, and this one's kind of obvious because when you're attempting a field goal or an extra point, you need lots of blockers, so you usually see linemen there. Lachlan Tomlinson plays pretty frequently on field goal units for the 49ers last year when they were attempting a field goal. He's a blocker. Again, not something that's that uncommon for a starting offensive lineman, but that'll probably be his primary role on the special teams units. Tyler Conklin was a guy who did not play a ton of special teams last year for the Vikings, but I looked through his history, and he especially plays a prominent role on kickoff returns. And that's, again, not that uncommon for a tight end because you want guys who can block, but you also want guys who are kind of mobile. So a tight end is kind of like an ideal role for somebody for that sort of role because tight ends can move, but they also have experience blocking. So you'll probably see Tyler Conklin on kickoff returns. And he didn't play as much last year because I think he kind of moved into a starting role with the Vikings, but you'll see him play that role, I think, especially as the second tight end on the Jets roster. And in the past, go back a little further, he was a guy who played fairly frequently on punt coverage as well. And again, that's a situation where you want somebody who could block, but somebody who's a little bit mobile, because you got to have your guys, first of all, prevent the block. You got to make sure that the defenders are accounted for. Somebody's picking up every defender. But you also need somebody who can get down the field and make a tackle. So that's where you could see Tyler Conklin. Now, CJ Uzomah, early in his career, he's played a lot of special teams for the Bengals, but as he's taken on a more full-time role and aged, it's kind of been scaled back. But Uzomah is another guy who I would expect to see on kickoff returns. That's kind of the role he played for the Bengals last year on special teams. So you'll see CJ Uzomah probably as a blocker on kickoff return teams. Now, when you get to some of the other guys on the roster, the Jets signed a couple of guys in the secondary, DJ Reed and Jordan Whitehead. DJ Reed, early in his career, was kind of a backup with the San Francisco 49ers under Robert Saleh, and he played a lot of special teams there. At this point, when you're talking about starting level players, you typically won't see them have extensive snaps on the special teams unit. And ultimately, I think for these two guys, especially what they did last year, you'll probably see them keep the same role, which essentially they play on the field goal block unit. And part of the reason you have a defender out there is you want guys who know what to do in coverage in case there's a fake. You also want some speed out there, maybe some guy who can fly off the edge and maybe block a field goal. So I think Jordan Whitehead, DJ Reed, if you look at their recent history, you look at what you want out of those units, you'll probably see those guys on the field goal block team. And the last guy is Jacob Martin, who kind of saw his special teams role scale back in the last couple of years with the Houston Texans as he took on a more full-time role. I think that this is the type of guy who maybe will see his special teams role increase. And he was kind of early in his career, he was kind of playing that Delshon Phillips, Justin Hardy type role where he was doing a little bit of everything. More recently, he's kind of moved over to the field goal block team. But I think this is a guy because I don't expect him to be a starter with the Jets. I think most likely what happens, the Jets will add another defensive lineman early in the draft. I'm not sure Jacob Martin's really a starter right now anyway. So I think he's more of a depth player, a situational player. And when you're a situational player, you have to be able to do more on special teams. So this is a guy I could kind of see shared across multiple units for the Jets. I think he hasn't played as much special teams recently, but I think his role could be increasing. Maybe you'll see him used in a similar way as Delshon Phillips. So those are the ways that I see the recent Jets signings used on special teams. And that's all for our show today. It's been fun talking about special teams. I hope you've enjoyed it. And you have to remember, it is around 15% of the plays in an NFL game are special teams. It can end up making a big difference. So keep that in mind as we move forward. But this has been the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, if you enjoy the show, leave it a 5-star review if you're listening on a podcast source. If you're watching on YouTube, give the episode a thumbs up. And I'll talk to you tomorrow on Tuesday as we will discuss the Jets a little bit more.